Hey, my name is Owen Daly. I'm 33 years old, and I live in a two-bedroom house on the east end of Delwood Avenue, in a small city called Morganfield, Kentucky. The kind of place where the same four families have owned the same four businesses for 40 years, and everyone who grew up here either stayed or spent the rest of their life explaining why they left. I work for the water department. Have for 8 years. My official title is Distribution System Technician, which sounds more complicated than it is. I drive a white utility truck to wherever the water isn't going right, and I figure out why, and I fix it. A cracked main under a parking lot. A corroded valve in a residential block that's been losing pressure since 2018. A meter vault that's taken on groundwater and thrown off the whole subloop. I carry a set of pipe wrenches that I've had since my first year on the job, and I know how to read the pressure in a line the way some people read a room. Not from any one number, but from the pattern, the trend, the way it's been moving. I wake up most mornings at 5:30, make a pot of coffee, check the overnight alerts from the monitoring system on my phone, and eat whatever I can put together before 6:15. I drive to the depot, pick up my assignments, and spend the day in the ground, literally, sometimes in an excavation, or above it, tracing the invisible system that keeps the whole city's water moving. I come home by 5 most days, sometimes later if something breaks in the afternoon. I wash my hands twice because once never quite does it. I eat something. I watch whatever's on. I go to sleep. The house has been mine for 4 years. I bought it because the price was right, and the block was quiet, and the neighbor on my left, a retired postal worker named Gerald, had told me when I came to look at it that the street flooded a little in heavy rain, but the drainage had been fixed in 2019, and he hadn't had water in his basement since. I appreciated that he told me before I bought instead of after. I made an offer the next day. Gerald and I had the kind of neighborly friendship that works best when nobody pushes it too hard. We waved from driveways. We talked over the fence about the weather and the local high school's football record, and once, at some length, about the particular noise a sump pump makes when it's about to fail. He brought me a piece of peach pie his wife had made that first summer, and I brought back the dishwashed. That was the shape of it. And the shape was good. The house on my right had been empty since the previous February, when Mrs. Paulette moved to her daughter's place in Owensboro. A for sale sign had been in the yard for 3 months, then a sold sticker went over it in late spring, and then for another 6 weeks, nothing happened. And then, one Saturday morning in August, I looked out my kitchen window, and a moving truck was backing down the street. I told myself I'd let her get settled. New people don't need a neighbor showing up on moving day with a casserole and a lot of questions. I'd been on the receiving end of that, and it wore you out. I'd introduce myself in a few days. Give her some room first. I lasted until noon. She knocked on my door with a measuring cup in her hand, one of those old aluminum ones with the bent pour spout, like it came from a kitchen that had been in use for 30 years. She was wearing a gray t-shirt with a small paint smear on the left shoulder. Jeans with a streak of something across the knee that might have been rust or might have been the moving truck. And her hair was back in a way that had started as a bun and had mostly given up on itself. She looked like she had been in motion since 6 in the morning, which she probably had. She was breathing slightly fast, and her eyes had the particular alertness of someone who is managing a lot of simultaneous things, and has just added one more. "I am so sorry to bother you," she said. "I'm Maura. I just moved in next door. I'm trying to cook something before the boxes swallow me alive, and I have literally nothing. Do you have salt? Like any amount?" "Yeah," I said. "Come in." I almost said I'd bring it out to her. The part of me that had been a quiet street person for 4 years wanted to hand it through the door and go back to my Saturday. I was in the middle of recalking the bathroom window. I had a system going. I didn't particularly want company in my kitchen, with the cabinet doors open and the recalk gun on the counter and the newspaper I'd laid down still spread across the floor. But she had said the boxes were swallowing her alive, and there was something about the measuring cup, the way she was holding it, not apologetically, but practically. Like this was a solvable problem and she was getting it solved. That made me step back from the door instead of forward. "Sorry about the state of things," I said. She looked at the recalk gun and the newspaper and the open cabinets, and then back at me. "You're recalking the window frame," she said. "Yeah, did you do the corners first or the long edges?" I looked at her. "Corners first." "Good," she said, like I had passed something. "My dad always did it the other way, and he'd have to redo it within 2 years." I got the salt from the cabinet. She poured about a tablespoon into the measuring cup, thanked me, and left. I stood in my kitchen for a moment, listening to her back door open and close. I went back to the window. I thought about the measuring cup. She came back at 6 that evening with a bowl of pasta. Not a dish with a lid on it, not something wrapped in foil, an actual bowl of pasta with a towel over it, still warm, that she held out to me when I opened the door. "Salt tax," she said. "I made too much." I took the bowl. It smelled like garlic and something herbed that I couldn't name. "You didn't have to do that." "I know," she said. "But I also cooked the entire box of pasta instead of half of it, because I couldn't find a measuring cup fast enough, and now I have about 4 servings I can't eat alone." She said this in the matter-of-fact way of someone who is not looking for sympathy, just accounting for the facts. So it's partly self-interest. "Do you want to come in and eat some of it?" She looked at me for half a second like she was deciding something. "Yeah," she said. "Yeah, I actually would." We sat at my kitchen table with the pasta and a couple of glasses of water because I hadn't gotten around to buying anything else that week, and she told me about the move. She'd driven from Indianapolis. She'd been there for 5 years working as a structural drafter. She drew the technical documents that translated an engineer's building design into something a crew could actually build, the exact dimensions and load paths and connection details that made a structure stand up rather than fall down. She had taken a job with a firm in Paducah that did a lot of regional infrastructure work, bridges and flood control structures and municipal buildings, which was why she was in Morganfield specifically. It was 20 minutes from Paducah, and the houses were half the price. "What made you want to do that kind of work?" I said. She turned her fork in the pasta. "My grandfather built houses," she said. "He didn't do the drawings, he did the framing. But he used to talk about how a wall was only as good as what was underneath it, that you could make a wall look like anything on the outside, but if the load path wasn't right, the whole thing was just waiting to go wrong in a specific way." She paused. I liked the idea of being the person who figured out the load path before anyone picked up a hammer. I thought about that. It was not entirely different from what I did. Reading the pressure in a line, understanding the system underneath the city's surface, finding the place where something was working against itself. "Water distribution works like that," I said. "You can fix the symptom a dozen times and it keeps coming back until you find where the real pressure is wrong." She looked at me with genuine attention. Not the polite attention people give you when they are waiting for you to finish, actual attention. "What's the most interesting thing that's gone wrong?" she said. I told her about a cross-connection event on the north side 2 summers ago, a backflow situation in an older industrial block that had been contaminating a residential loop for weeks before the pressure readings finally pointed us to it. She asked 3 questions during the telling, each one sharper than the last, and by the third one I understood she was not making conversation. She was actually following the hydraulics. We ate the rest of the pasta, and she went home around 8 to finish the unpacking. I washed the bowl and set it on the counter. The kitchen felt quieter than usual after she left. Not emptier. I'd been eating alone in that kitchen for 4 years and knew exactly what empty felt like. Something slightly different, like a system that had been running steady and quiet, had just registered a change in input and was recalibrating. I saw her most mornings after that. She left for Paducah at 7:15, and I left for the depot at 6:15. But there was an overlap where we both ended up in our driveways at the same time. Her with coffee in a travel mug, me with a thermos. We'd stand there for a few minutes before we got in our respective vehicles. She talked fast in the mornings, like her brain was already at the office and her mouth was trying to catch up. I was slower in the mornings, which she seemed to understand instinctively. She'd say most of a thought and wait, and I'd respond when I had the words. One morning in September, she told me about a revision that had come back from an engineer with 17 comments on a load calculation she had checked 3 times. She was not venting. She was thinking through it out loud, already working toward the answer while the problem was still fresh. I listened, and when she paused, I said, "Where's the biggest discrepancy?" And she told me, and I said, "That's where he's wrong." And she looked at me for a moment and then said, "Yeah, I think you're right," and got in her car. The next morning she said, "You were right." I went back to the source table, and his assumption about the live load factor was off. "What did you do?" "Sent him a very polite email with the table cited," she said. "He's going to pretend he misread it." "They always do," I said. She looked at me over the roof of her car. "How does a water distribution tech know how engineers handle being wrong?" "Engineers and water pressure operate the same way," I said. "They both find the path of least resistance when they don't want to admit something." She laughed out loud in the driveway at 6:50 in the morning, which was a sound I noted and filed. After about 3 weeks, she started knocking in the evenings occasionally, and I started leaving the porch light on after dinner, which I hadn't done before, without making a decision about it. One of those gradual adjustments the body makes before the mind catches up. I found out about her daughter in October, about 6 weeks after she moved in. Her name was Cora. She was 7. She lived with Maura's ex-husband in Indianapolis under a custody arrangement that gave Maura alternating weekends and a 2-week block in the summer, and Maura had moved to Morganfield, had taken the job in Paducah, had left the city where she had 5 years of her life, in part because the job was good, and in part because she needed to be somewhere that wasn't full of all the things that reminded her of what the arrangement had cost her. She told me this on the front porch, on a Thursday evening after a long week for both of us. She wasn't crying. She was doing the thing I had started to recognize as her particular form of restraint, her voice slightly more controlled than usual, her posture very straight, her hands still in her lap. She said it plainly, the way you say things you have practiced saying plainly, because the alternative is not saying them at all. "She's coming in 2 weeks," she said. "The first time since the move. I've been trying to set up her room, but I keep stopping in the middle and just standing there." I didn't say anything for a moment. "Does she have a bed?" I said. "Yeah, I got the bed. It's the everything else. The everything else is easier to fix than the bed," I said. She looked at me sideways. "Is that your version of a pep talk?" "It's my version of a fact," I said. She let out a short breath that was almost a laugh. Then she was quiet for a moment. "I used to put her to bed every night," she said. "Every single night for 4 years. And then the arrangement started, and I went home to an apartment that still had her nightlight plugged in by the bathroom door, and I left it in. For 6 months. I couldn't take it out." She said this to the middle distance, not to me. I took it out when I packed to move here. That felt like the right time. I put my hand over hers on the arm of the chair. I didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say that wouldn't sound like less than what she'd just told me. So I didn't try. After a while, she turned her hand over under mine. We sat like that until it got too cool on the porch and she went inside. I stayed out a little longer. The street was quiet, the way it was always quiet at that hour. The same way it had been quiet every night for 4 years. But the porch light was on next door now, too, and through the front window I could see the blue light of Maura's laptop and the shadow of her moving around, and the street felt different than it had in August. Not fixed. I wasn't thinking about it in those terms yet. Just different in the way a pressure system feels different after you've found where the load was wrong. The part of me that was careful, and I had always been careful, in the specific way of someone who had learned that things you build take a long time and break quickly, wanted to stay right there, at the edge of it, not naming it, not moving toward it. I had been careful with the house and careful with the job and careful with the particular quiet of my life, and the carefulness had served me. I hadn't lost anything I couldn't account for. But I thought about the nightlight she'd left plugged in for 6 months. I thought about the way she'd said I used to put her to bed every single night. Not to make me feel something, but because it was true, and she was the kind of person who said true things plainly, regardless of what they cost. I had been alone in this house for 4 years, and I had been fine. The way a properly maintained system is fine, everything working. Nothing failing. Nothing more than that. And sitting on the porch with her hand turned over under mine, I understood for the first time that fine and good are not the same thing. That a system can run clean and steady, and still be doing nothing except running. That the question worth asking is not whether it's working, but what it's for. I didn't name it that night. But I knew where it was. I knew the address. The way I always knew the address of things. This time I thought I might go back. That Saturday I went to the hardware store and bought a small shelf kit, a short run of baseboard trim, and a sample pot of paint that was close to the color Maura had told me she was doing Cora's room. I knocked on her door at 9 in the morning. She answered it, holding a paint roller. "What are you doing?" she said. "You said everything else was the problem," I said. "I'm good at everything else." She looked at the shelf kit, and then at me, and then at the shelf kit again. "Owen, I'm not doing it for free," I said. "I'll need coffee and whatever you're making for lunch." She stepped back from the door. We worked in Cora's room for most of the day. Maura painted. She had strong opinions about the right way to cut in at the ceiling, and turned out to be correct about them. And I mounted the shelf on the wall opposite the window, where the afternoon light would hit it, and ran the baseboard along the gap that the previous flooring had left under the radiator. Maura had a small wooden box of Cora's things she'd kept from the Indianapolis apartment. A few books, a ceramic-painted horse, a small framed photo that she placed on the shelf and stepped back from, without saying anything. I didn't say anything either. I just moved on to the next piece of trim. At lunch, we sat on her kitchen floor because her table was still buried under boxes she hadn't unpacked yet. She made grilled cheese. I ate mine in about 4 minutes, which she commented on. "I ate fast on job sites," I said. "You get a 20-minute window and you learn to use it." "Do you miss it?" she said. "Working outside all day." "I still work outside most of the day," I said. "I mean, the solving of it. The thing right in front of you that has one answer." I thought about this. "The drawing work doesn't do that?" "It does," she said. "But there's always another revision, another set of comments. The thing is never finished, it just gets approved and moves on." She picked at the edge of her grilled cheese. "Sometimes I think I chose the wrong end of the building process. I should have gone into what my grandfather did. Framing. The moment the wall goes up is the moment it's done. The wall being done is the easy part, I said. The thing my job taught me is that the done part isn't the end. You come back in 20 years and the done part is what's given you all your problems. Nothing in a system is ever really done. It's just been working quietly until it hasn't. She looked at me. That's either the most depressing thing I've ever heard, or the most honest. Probably both, I said. She smiled, and for the first time since I'd known her, the smile reached her eyes before it reached her mouth. Cora came on a Friday evening at the start of November. Maura picked her up from the arranged meeting point 2 towns over, and I was sitting on my porch when the car came down the street and pulled into the driveway. I wasn't trying to be there. I had been outside with a mug of coffee, and I simply hadn't gone in yet. I heard Cora before I saw her. She had a high, clear voice that was asking a question about something as she got out of the car, and Maura answered her in the slightly higher register people use with children. And then there was the sound of a bag being pulled from the back seat and small feet on the driveway. She saw me from the driveway. She stopped. She was small for 7, with Maura's dark hair, and she was wearing a puffy orange coat that made her look slightly like a very determined sweet potato. She stared at me with the direct, evaluating gaze of a child who has not yet learned to disguise the fact that she is deciding what she thinks about you. "That's Owen," Maura said. "He's my neighbor. He built the shelf in your room." Cora looked at me for another moment. "Did you build the whole shelf or just put it together?" "Built it," I said, "from the pieces." She considered this seriously. "Okay," she said, and went inside. Maura looked at me over the roof of the car. She pressed her lips together to keep from laughing. "High praise," she said. "I'll take it," I said. They were there for a week. I gave them space most of it, but Cora knocked on my door Sunday morning to ask if she could see the utility truck, which Maura had apparently mentioned in some context I didn't know about. I took her out to the driveway and showed her the equipment bay and the pressure gauges and the job log tablet, and she asked approximately 40 questions in 11 minutes, several of them better than questions I'd gotten from adult colleagues. When I explained the concept of water pressure in a main line, she nodded with a focused expression and said, "So it's like when you squeeze the toothpaste tube wrong and it comes out the side." "Yeah," I said. "That's exactly what it is." She smiled like she had solved something. Then she went back inside, and I stood in the driveway for a moment in the November cold with my hand still on the tailgate of the truck. I went back inside and stood in my kitchen. I had been in that house for 4 years. I had fixed the window and recalked the bathroom and replaced the kitchen faucet and repainted the back bedroom. I had made the house work the way it was supposed to work. But standing in the kitchen that morning, it struck me that I had never once sat on the floor to eat grilled cheese in it. I had never built a shelf for anyone in it. I had never left a porch light on because someone might come by. I got my coffee and stood at the window that looked toward next door for a while. In the distribution system, there's a concept called a dead-end main. A pipe that runs out to the edge of its route and stops there, looped to nothing. Pressure maintained from one direction only. They're not ideal. The water sits too still. The chlorine dissipates faster. You have to flush them regularly to keep the quality up. I had done it for 8 years and understood it the way you understand anything you've done long enough, not as a problem, just as the shape of how things were. I thought about that concept for the first time in 4 years as something other than a professional matter. I didn't name what I was feeling, but I knew the shape of it. It was the same shape as the absence that had been in the house before August, just in reverse, the same size, the same place, but going the other direction. The problem with Dennis arrived in December. Dennis was Maura's ex-husband. I knew him through the facts Maura had given me over months of conversations, that he was in finance, that he was good at convincing people he was reasonable, that the custody arrangement had come out of a mediation process that had lasted 9 months, and that Maura said she'd agreed to certain terms because she'd been too tired to fight them, and had been trying to undo that tiredness ever since. He drove down from Indianapolis on a Saturday when Cora was supposed to be with Maura, which was not part of the arrangement. He parked in front of Maura's house and knocked on the door, and I could see from my kitchen window that Maura had opened it about 8 inches and not further. I wasn't watching. The window faces that direction, and I happened to be at the sink. But I watched the second time. The second time he came back was the following Saturday, and that time he had papers. I don't know exactly what they said. What I know is that after he left, Maura knocked on my door, and when I opened it, she handed me a legal document and said, "Can you read this and tell me if I'm understanding it correctly? I am not a lawyer, but I can read a document that has a clear intent, and the intent of this one was clear." He was requesting a modification to the custody arrangement based on the assertion that the move to Morganfield had meaningfully reduced Cora's access to her established relationships and community, and he was citing the distance specifically. "He knew I was moving here," Maura said. She was sitting at my kitchen table. Her hands were flat on the table the same way they'd been flat on her thighs at her door on that first Saturday in August, holding herself together. He helped me pack 3 boxes before it went wrong again. And now this is him using my own decision against me. "Have you talked to a lawyer?" I said. "I have a call Monday," she said. "But I needed to understand what I was looking at before Monday." She looked at the document. I needed someone to just look at it with me. I sat down across from her. We went through it. I asked her the questions I would ask about a broken main. Where was the claim weakest? Where was the logic not holding? What did the numbers actually show if you looked at them straight? She answered them steadily, and as she answered them, she began to hear what she was saying. The modification argument rested heavily on Cora's reduced contact with Indianapolis-based relationships. But Cora had started at a school in Morganfield, had a teacher she talked about constantly, had made 2 friends she'd mentioned by name. The distance was real. The harm argument was not. "Your lawyer's going to be able to work with this," I said. "You don't know that." "No," I said, "but you do. You've been building Cora a life here for 4 months. That's not nothing. A court's going to see that." She looked at me for a moment. She was not doing the controlled posture thing. She was just looking at me, plainly and tired. "I am so tired of being a person that things happen to," she said. "You're not," I said. "You moved here. You took the job. You built her room. You've been doing things the whole time. He's just making you feel like you're standing still." She looked down at the document. Then she squared it on the table and pushed it aside. "Okay," she said. "Okay," I said. She stayed for an hour. We talked about other things. The pressure test I had done that week on a newly installed loop in the South End. The load analysis she was finishing for a pedestrian bridge in McCracken County. We talked in the way we had learned to talk, which was directly and without filling every silence. At one point, Gerald knocked to drop off a jar of his wife's apple butter, and he looked at the 2 of us at the table and said, entirely without preamble, about time, and left before either of us could respond. Maura watched him go back across the yard. "Does he do that often?" she said. "Never," I said. The 3rd time Dennis came was a Tuesday evening in January when Cora was in Indianapolis. He knocked on Maura's door, and when she didn't answer, she was at the grocery store. Her car was gone. I could see the driveway. He stood on her porch for a while, and then knocked on mine. I opened the door. He was well put together, the way the document had been well put together. Everything in order, nothing out of place. The surface of a man who had decided that presentation was the same thing as substance. He told me his name and said he was a friend of Mora's, which was one of the most precisely wrong descriptions of himself he could have chosen. "She's not home," I said. "I know," he said. "I wanted to talk to you, actually, man to man." He said this with the easy confidence of someone who has found that phrase opens doors. "I understand you've gotten close with Mora. And I want you to understand the full picture of the situation, because I think she may have told you her version, and there are things." "I'm going to stop you there," I said. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't move from the doorframe. Whatever you've come here to tell me about Mora isn't something I'm going to hear. She's a grown woman. Her choices are her own. I'm not an audience for your version of her." He looked at me. He had the expression of someone accustomed to reasonable conversations who had not anticipated an unreasonable outcome. "I just think," he started. "She's not home," I said. "I'd ask you not to wait on her porch." I closed the door. I stood in the hallway for a moment. Then I texted Mora. "Dennis came by. Knocked on mine when you weren't home. Told him you weren't here. You okay to come by when you're back?" She was at my door 11 minutes later, groceries still in her arms. I took the bags and we put the groceries away together, and she sat at the kitchen table while I heated up the soup that was already on the stove. She didn't say anything for a while. I didn't push her. "He came to your door," she said eventually. "Yeah, what did he say?" "He wanted to give me his version of you," I said. I told him I wasn't interested. She looked at me for a long moment. "Owen," she said. "Yeah." She got up from the table and came to where I was standing at the stove, and she put both her hands flat against my back and leaned her forehead between my shoulder blades. She didn't say anything. I put my hand back and covered one of hers without turning around. We stood there like that for a while, and it was not complicated in the way I had been preparing myself for it to be complicated. It was just the two of us in the kitchen with the soup on the stove and the January outside the window, and everything that had been accumulating since a Saturday in August with a measuring cup and a bent pour spout was simply present in the room with us, not needing to be announced. She told me she loved me the following April, on the front porch, in the ordinary way, not as a declaration, but as the kind of observation you make when you have finally given yourself permission to state the obvious. We had been sitting out there after dinner, the way we had started doing when the evenings got warm enough. Cora was inside watching something on Mora's laptop, and we could hear the sound of it through the screen door, and Mora had her feet up on the porch railing and was looking at the street. "I love you," she said. The same way she might have said the soup's ready or there's rain coming tomorrow. No setup. No ceremony. I looked at her. She was looking at the street. "I know," I said. She turned her head. "You know?" "I've known for a while," I said. "I was waiting." She stared at me. "For what?" "For you to be ready to say it without it scaring you." A pause. "Then, don't ever leave this street, Owen Daly." She said it quietly, almost to herself. Not as a request, as a statement of a fact she had decided was going to be true. I looked at the street. At the ordinary shape of it in the spring evening, the trees coming back, Gerald's car in his driveway, the porch lights on at the houses I had driven past 1,000 times without thinking about any of them. "Wasn't planning on it," I said. She put her feet down and moved her chair slightly closer to mine, and we sat like that, watching the street settle into the dark. That was 14 months ago. Cora visits every other weekend now, and for 6 weeks in the summer. And the custody modification was withdrawn after Maura's lawyer filed a response that was, by her description, the single most organized document she had ever seen a lawyer produce. Cora has a reading corner in her room at Maura's with a beanbag chair I found at the hardware store in the wrong section, and a small lamp she picked out herself at a garage sale 2 streets over. She has decided that structural drafting is more interesting than water distribution, a judgment she has delivered to me directly and without apology, which I respect. Gerald told his wife about Maura and me the week after I told him, and his wife Ruth came over the next day with 2 pieces of peach pie, one for each of us, and said she'd known since September and didn't understand why it had taken the rest of us so long. Maura is still at the Paducah firm. She is finishing the load analysis on a pedestrian bridge that is going to cross a floodplain at the edge of the county. The kind of structure that will be there for 80 years without anyone noticing it, doing its job, keeping the load path honest. She told me when she's done she wants to go walk across it, just to stand on the thing she drew and feel it hold. I understand that. There is something about work that is invisible until it fails. Water systems, load paths, the things that keep a structure standing, that makes you want to stand in the middle of what you've made and feel it doing what it's supposed to do. Just to know it's real. Just to know it held. Some mornings I still make the coffee and check the overnight alerts and stand at the kitchen window with the same mug I've had for 5 years. The street looks the same. The depot run is the same. The wrenches are the same. But the porch light was on all winter next door, and there is a beanbag chair in a room I built a shelf for. And on Saturday mornings a 7-year-old sometimes knocks on my door and asks hydraulic questions that are better than they should be. My father, before he died, told me once that a house is just a structure until you stop maintaining it alone. I was 22, and I thought he was talking about gutters. He probably was. But he was also talking about everything else. I had spent 8 years making sure the water got to where it was supposed to go. I understood the system. I understood pressure and load, and the particular cost of something going wrong in a place you can't see. What I had not understood, until a woman knocked on my door with a measuring cup and a bent pour spout, and the absolute practical confidence of someone who knows what she needs and goes to get it, was that a system built to carry something important will always tell you, if you know how to read it, when something new is coming through. You just have to be standing close enough to feel the change in the line.